Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the audience. Welcome to today's webinar, the Strengthening Sustainable Stewardship for New Antibiotics, leveraging cross-sector experiences with a focus on low and middle-income countries. This is a webinar co-hosted by ICARS and the Access to Medicine Foundation. My name is Fabian Massa, and I work at ICARS, which is International Center for Antimicrobial Resistance Solutions. And together with Claudia Martinez from Access to Medicine Foundation, we will be moderating this webinar. So we are pleased to have such a diverse and engaged audience joining us on this critical conversation today. Just for everyone to know, this webinar will be recorded and also will be shared later in social medias on ICARS and Access to Medicine Foundation websites. Just to want to start doing a brief introduction on the outline of this webinar and as well what are the aims that make us be here today. And just to say that this webinar takes place at a crucial juncture in the global fight against antimicrobial resistance. And following the commitment made at the United Nations General Assembly in September 2024, countries have resolved to reduce AMR-related death by 10% by 2030. And achieving this target required coordinated efforts to strengthen research and development, improve access to life-saving antibiotics, and also ensure the responsible use through effective antimicrobial stewardship. And today, we turn our focus to low and middle-income countries where the dual challenges of antibiotics excess and limited access compound the burden of drug-resistant infections. In these settings, weak health system and limited stewardship mechanism often lead to indiscriminated antibiotics use, accelerating pitifully the resistance and threatening the effectiveness of new medicines. To address these challenges, we believe that antimicrobial stewardship must be embedded into health system as a core component of antibiotic introduction strategies. And over the next 90 minutes, we will aim to discern the essential factors needed for fostering an AMS-enabling ecosystem, and sharing learnings across the public and private sector from past efforts to improve antimicrobial stewardship, identify enablers and barriers for AMS uptake and scale up in low and middle income countries, and also provide recommendations to inform more sustained appropriate use for new antibiotics. So the session will be we'll start with myself presenting and giving a little bit of introduction of ICARS and the project that the ICARS is working on that related with AMS and an introduction of novel last resort antibiotics, followed by a presentation from Claudia Martinez, our other co-host, on as well a brief introduction of Access to Medicine Foundation and the efforts on AMR. And after that, we are going to have a short presentation from 5 different panelists. They will have an 8-minute presentation. Some of them are like, we have different panelists from different organizations, Carbex, Pfizer, React Africa Network, PGI, and also WHO. After finishing of this short presentation, we will have a Q&A session where we expect for all of you, the audience, to be engaged and ask questions and share your perspective. So again, thank you for joining us, and I look forward to an engaging and productive session. So then I will move to our agenda, the start of our agenda. So I'm going to present ICARS project, which is towards an antibiotics roadmap for the sustainable entry and management of antibiotic X, which is any kind of new last resort antibiotics. We call it Tandem ABX. So my name again is Fabian Massa. I'm a medical doctor and global health specialist, and I work as a science officer at the International Center for Antimicrobial Resistance Solutions. So just to start with a little bit about what is ICARS. ICARS is like then an independent self-governing institution working internationally in partnership with low and middle income countries, governments, and research institutions with the objective to develop and test context-specific solutions to tackle antimicrobial resistance. So we provide fundings, but also we give like expertise, scientific expertise across the One Health spectrum: human health, animal health, environment, climate change. This is the ICARS started as a Danish initiative in 2018. And now, as I mentioned before, it's an independent self-organization since 2021, attracting funding from member states as well as different foundations. At the moment, ICARS have more than 40 employees from more than 20 different countries. And something that is really particular and unique from ICARS is our top-down, bottom-up approach, where we believe that all the initiatives need to start with the engagement of the government, as well based on the national action plans, but also bring together the local researchers. We are the one who understand the context to build to solutions to tackle antimicrobial resistance. So in this map, you could see different projects that ICAR has around the globe. We already have 41 projects that are on implementation in more than 21 countries and around the One Health spectrum in environment, animal, human, and aquaculture. So then as well, we have projects that are totally funded by ICARS, which are like co-developed between ICARS and the ministries and research institutions, but also we have co-funded projects which are like partially funded by other partners and local research institutions. So now enter into what brings us to this webinar. So I just wanted to present what ICARS has been working on, which is our project Tandem ABX, which is this project aims to develop and implement a stepwise, context-specific, drug-agnostic, but really important as well, locally owned sustainable use framework, which provides us seamlessly linked between access and stewardship for new reserve antibiotics. This project, what it aims is to demonstrate that key AMS implementation strategies can be feasible, acceptable, scalable, and provide practical models that can be integrated into existing low and middle income countries' health structures and systems for ensuring appropriate use of reserve antibiotics over the long term. So our vision is to establish a strong link between access and stewardship, two elements that often seen as competing priorities, but in reality are deeply interconnected. These priorities don't need to be at odds if we strengthen health system through proactive, data-driven pathway, and by fostering collaboration and tailoring responses to diverse needs of patients, we can create a system that supports sustained and appropriate use of antibiotics. So we started, just to mention as well, that this project is supported by Novo Nordisk Foundation, and we started with a planning grant, 1-year planning grant, which the objective to get like a granular understanding of the current policy and health system context, where we are planning to, where a broader Tandem ABX framework is planned to be pilot. In this case, will be India, in Asia, and Kenya in sub-Saharan Africa, as well to undertake vital preparatory activities, including identification and close collaboration with the different partners as Aga Khan University Hospital Nairobi, the Indian School of Business, CMC Vellore, GARPI, and among others. And also the idea of, or what we are planning to do during this planning 1-year planning grant is to develop a theoretical Tandem ABX framework based on literature review, but also on stakeholder consultations in the countries where we are planning to conduct the pilot. So in which point are we now? So we are in the proof of context. So we are like trying to figure out if this is appropriate and that, and if how that will work. And the idea is on this coming year, start going to the next stage, which is the proof of implementation, to go to a pilot, to try to pilot this framework that we have been working on or trying to develop during this 1-year planning run. So just to give a brief of some of the big activities that we did, and I think that's like quite really important because one of the main objectives of this framework is that it's country-owned. So just wanted to mention that we have different stakeholder consultation in Kenya in November, together with Aga Khan University Hospital, and with the participation of the Ministry of Health in Kenya, we conducted a stakeholder consultation in Nairobi, where we have a representation of around 50 people from ministry, research institutions, that it was really value to start like understanding the needs and how we could refine this framework. Also, in India, we conducted 3 different consultations, one in Mohali, Punjab, one in Hyderabad, Telangana, and also another one in Kerala. And finally, we are planning to conduct a global stakeholder consultation on 10th and 11th of February in Copenhagen, Denmark, where we are going to bring the representative from these countries and also some other global health players and present and start as well to keep refining this framework further, and then to start planning to move to the next stage, which is this the pilot of the framework. So I think I'm going to stop here, since I know this is like a short time. Hopefully I didn't extend too much. And I'm going to pass over my colleague, Claudia, so she can present on behalf of Access to Medicine Foundation. And just to, sorry, Claudia, just a second, just to remind you all the audience, like, please, you can add in the Q&A chat any questions, and after the presentation of all the panelists, we can start answer some of them. Perfect, that's all. Over to you, Claudia.
Great, thank you. Can you please let me know if you can see my screen okay?
It's not. Yes.
Yeah,
now we see it.
correct.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Fabian, for the introduction, also for the overview on the framework. And good morning, good afternoon, everyone. And thank you again for joining this webinar. We're very excited to be co-hosting with ICARS today. My name is Claudia Martinez. I am the Director of Research at the Access to Medicine Foundation, where I lead our strategic research work across many different programs, including our work on antimicrobial resistance, which I will tell you a bit about in this very short presentation. I want to start by giving you a bit of a sense of what we do and who we are. We are an independent, not-for-profit organization based in the Netherlands. And our mission is to mobilize healthcare companies to improve access to medicine, specifically in low and middle income countries. As I mentioned, we are fully independent. We do not receive any funding from the pharmaceutical industry or any other healthcare companies, and you can see our funders listed at the bottom of the slide. And I want to take a bit of a second just to reiterate the challenge that we're up against. AMR is rising faster than expected. We know that if replacement antibiotics and antifungals are not developed and approved, then the impact on public health will be severe. This is a major health security issue that can be prevented. And even though we understand that this requires action for multiple stakeholders, we do see the pharmaceutical industry having a central role to play. And there are key ways in which pharmaceutical companies can take action to curb AMR, for example, by increasing and sustaining R&D investment, by limiting antibacterial waste from manufacturing, critically by delivering appropriate access to life-saving medicines and vaccines, which is the topic of this webinar, and also avoiding the overuse and misuse of antimicrobial medicines. And this is something that we have been tackling through our dedicated program on AMR, the Antimicrobial Resistance Benchmark, which is something that you will be seeing now on the slide as an overview of the 2021 benchmark. As of now, is the only independent comparison of how pharmaceutical companies are acting to curb AMR and the types of actions that they're implementing. Again, this provides a brief overview of the report that we launched in 2021, where we looked at 17 companies ranging from large R&D-based pharmaceutical companies to generic medicine manufacturers. And we tried to contextualize the types of actions that are being undertaken across different research areas, one of those being access and stewardship. We're able to identify best practices. We're able to provide a very detailed overview of each of the company strategies. And by giving companies public recognitions for their actions on AMR, the benchmark seeks to provide an accountability mechanism, but also an incentive for companies to be able to further expand their activities. Something that I wanted to highlight also is sort of how does this program actually move the needle on AMR? And I think I would boil it down to perhaps three things that are very important to us and our theory of change. What gets measured gets done. And again, this is the only program that has a dedicated focus on companies and their actions, being able to spotlight not only strategies, best practices, but also opportunities that we have found for many years measuring companies that creates a really good platform for them to understand what are the best actions that they could move forward, who can they partner with to be able to address some of these challenges. So these insights that we're able to bring forward, they help propagate best practices and also address gaps. Secondly, since 2021 and in between, we have worked quite intensively on a series of thematic studies, understanding that there are specific research questions that require further insight. And we have, and you can see them there, we have published specific research looking at areas such as appropriate access and responsible manufacturing, all of these available on our website. And lastly, we do a lot of work with investors. This is via workshops, panels, and collective actions. We work with investors to hopefully encourage and influence action from pharmaceutical companies. One of the projects that we have been working on since 2020 is the Investor Action on Antimicrobial Resistance Coalition that seeks to mobilize investor power to drive change. I want to finalize with a very short overview of our work and how is it that we can help. As you can see, since the first publication of the benchmark back in 2018, with the methodology being out in 2017, again, we have worked on different streams of research work that would hopefully bring valuable data and opportunities for companies, but also other stakeholders participating in the landscape. And as you could see towards the end of 2025, we are planning to bring out in Q1 26 the new iteration of the antimicrobial resistance benchmark, which will be supported by a new updated methodological framework to be able to further understand the areas of action and expectation, specifically of companies on AMR. I want to thank you again for taking the time to listen, and I look forward to the discussion. Thank you, Fabian. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Claudia, for that insightful presentation on the work of Access to Medicine Foundation. So then now we can start the presentation from our panelists. So it's my pleasure to introduce Ms. Louise Norton-Smith, recently returned from a year sabbatical to join Carbex the combating antibiotic resistant bacteria accelerator, as one of the two directors of external affairs. Until December 2023, Louise was a career civil servant at the UK's Department of Health and Social Care, lately heading up the global AMR strategy team. In this role, Louise oversaw the delivery of the UK's Global AMR Innovation Fund's GAMBRIEF, established the Office of the UK Special Envoy on AMR, and led the UK negotiation on human health AMR within bilateral and multilateral fora such as the G7, G20, and UN. So over to you, Louise.
Thank you, Fabian. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So just as I share my screen, is that visible to everybody? Not quite. Let me try that. Is that any better?
It's coming.
That's
Now,
perfect.
Yeah,
I can
perfect.
see.
Thank you. So yes, thank you ever so much for inviting me and to the organisers at the Access to Medicine Foundation and ICARS, two organisations I've had the pleasure of working with directly over the last few years. And as Fabian said, I'm Louise Norton-Smith. I'm presenting on behalf of Carbex today. Some of you may know me with my old hat on when I used to work for the UK government. But for those of you not already aware, so Carbex is hosted by Boston University in the USA, and it's the world's largest single public-private partnership working to accelerate antibacterial countermeasure development through the early stages of the pipeline. And we're funded by 6 of the G7 governments, as well as the 3 largest global health foundations, so the Gates Foundation, Wellcome Trust, and Novo Nordisk Foundation. And today I'm going to be speaking about the ways that Carbex has integrated access and stewardship into the way that we operate. Oops, sorry about that. So just very briefly then, Carbex accelerates those translational R&D projects into human clinical trials. And we cover therapeutics, preventatives, and diagnostics. So it's not just a therapeutics pipeline or portfolio that we have. The R&D projects themselves are selected through global public funding calls, which are validated by external experts. And the funding decisions are very much focused on performance characteristics and the pathogens and infectious syndromes with the highest morbidity and mortality rates. We require stewardship and access obligations, which I'll be talking about in a bit more detail. The funding is non-dilutive, and product developers, PDs as we call them, have access to a multi-layered support model, so it's not just about cash. The product developers are required to provide a level of cost share which ensures sustainability. And together, that is advancing very much the most promising early stage development portfolio, which also can be, I guess, seen in the most recent WHO preclinical pipeline, where over 50% of those candidates have received Carbex funding. And so in terms of where we fit in the overall ecosystem, we take things up to and including phase 1 clinical trials before then hopefully handing them over to other funders or developers. But of course, we can only be as effective in our endeavours if we have promising countermeasure candidates coming through early stages, or basic research, in fact, and early discovery, and that there is a sustainable home for them to be taken forward through late stage clinical development and with the rollout and uptake of successful projects. So in terms of Carbex-led activities and initiatives to promote stewardship and access, we can broadly define them as portfolio design, the underlying contractual levers that we have at our disposal, bespoke non-financial support to individual product developers, cross-cutting tools that are accessible to both PDs and the community at large, and of course thought leadership on incentives to address the intrinsic antibacterial market failures. So I'm just going to focus on a couple of these today. So a key tenet of the CARBEX strategy is to be responsive to emerging data on burden of disease. And data from the GRAM study has really helped us refine our objectives to go beyond just the priority pathogen lists of WHO and CDC and considers the specific syndromic and disease burdens that are becoming clearer. So not just for the global north, but also in lower middle income countries where historically data have not been sufficiently available. So this graphic really shows the alignment of the CARBEX funded projects that have come through our portfolio with the most significant syndromic and disease areas as per the GRAM study, plus gonorrhea, which was excluded from GRAM. And as I said at the beginning, CARBEX is not just a funder of product development. The R&D team led by Dr. Erin Duffy really designs and coordinates a range of direct support that is bespoke to each of those products. And the support is not just scientific in nature, but also helps PDs prepare for future fundraising opportunities to take their product through later stage development. And PDs have access to a wide range of subject matter expertise from across different disciplines and from around the world. So there's real diversity of thought there as well. They can use a number of preclinical services, and in terms of indirect support, PDs can benefit from studies and activities that have been commissioned by CARBEX, such as the portfolio acceleration tools that we have, and our newest addition in the form of a pilot market shaping project with the Clinton Health Access Initiative, or CHI. So I'm not going to touch in any great detail on the portfolio acceleration tools, but this just shows the range of activities that are available, and they're designed to really create efficiencies in the system and in the cost of developing products by tackling common issues faced by product developers. And this is the really important part, I think, for this particular webinar, is the work that we do on stewardship and access. And the CARBEX funding model is very much predicated on that three-legged stool for antibiotic sustainability. So, of course, if you remove one of these legs, the whole stool collapses. And as such, we didn't just take a fund and forget approach. Instead, we've developed two key contractual levers to embed stewardship and access considerations. And the first was developed in coordination with and with the support of the Access to Medicine Foundation, along with other colleagues and indeed CARBEX funders. And it really embeds those considerations from the very earliest stages of support. It requires product developers to develop a non-confidential plan for when their product actually enters pivotal clinical trials, so generally phase 3 or the equivalent for the diagnostics projects. Those plans are updated and they're published on the CARBEX website when a product is first approved by any of the FDA, EMA, the UK, or the PMDA regulatory authorities. And this obligation survives the termination or indeed the expiry of CARBEX subaward agreements. So it follows the product to product IP expiration in any one of those key territories. And in order to help PDs deliver on this requirement, CARBEX and a number of its funders work together, as I mentioned, to develop a guide that really provides some step-by-step thinking, because often our product developers are from very small companies with limited experience in considering these sorts of things. And it was developed in coordination with industry. So we had the Biotechnology Innovation Organization work with us to make this as accessible and as useful as possible. And of course, it's available for the wider community as well. And then we also have the commercialization plan requirements, which, contrary to the stewardship and access plan, is actually a confidential document. Again, it's developed once a product has first approval, but it's a contractual requirement that follows them even if they are not then funded by CARBEX. The PD, the product developer themselves, define where they intend to market their product, and any territories that they have not chosen become other territories. And that's where the PD is encouraged to enter voluntary negotiations with Wellcome to support product rollout in markets that may be non-traditional for them. So in summary, I just wanted to mention the fact that we have evolved. I've certainly seen it before joining Carbex and now within Carbex. And so as the data emerges, so we're becoming more attuned to that burden of disease and where those products are really required. We're leveraging that role as a funder to drive those products, even if we're at the early stages, to really drive the products closer to patients. And we're very much supporting product developers to fulfill those contractual requirements on both stewardship and access. And the number of tools that we have mean that they are able to access support that would not normally have been available to them and really accelerate the products through the portfolio. So I'll pause there and look forward to questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Louise. And thank you for just providing an overview of the work, particularly some of the work that you have done on stewardship, which is extremely important. I think we're going to hand over to our next panelist, and then we're going to save the questions towards the end. So can I just please ask everyone to do pop your questions in the Q&A box, either specific questions for Louise or any of the panelists or just general questions. So with that, I would like to introduce our next panelist, Dr. Akshata Mane, who is the medical lead for specialty care that includes the injectable anti-infectives team at Pfizer Medical India. Dr. Akshata is a pharmacologist by training, and she has been with Pfizer for now more than 8 years. She's also a certified digital health professional, and as part of her work and her team's work, they collaborate very closely with healthcare professionals, hospitals, and associations to facilitate the education, capacity building, and implementation of AMS in hospitals, with the objective to encourage appropriate use of antibiotics to reduce AMR. Thank you so much for joining us, Akshata, and over to you.
Thank you so much for that kind introduction, and let me know once you see my slides.
Yes.
There we go. Yes, thank you. So at the outset, I'd like to thank ICARS and the Access to Medicine Foundation for giving me an opportunity to talk about our experience of the launch of an innovative anti-infective in our country. These are my general disclaimers. To begin with, since I'm from the medical team, I'll be putting forth my medical perspective or the scientific aspects of how did we go about ensuring that there is appropriate use of ceftazidime avibactam, the innovative anti-infective that we had launched around 4 years ago. This dates back to probably the resistance scenario that was prevalent at that point in time, that highlighted the unmet need for newer options to manage patients better. This is a surveillance report. I have picked up a few organisms from there and the trends in susceptibility to carbapenem there, specifically meropenem. This report is published by a national body called as Indian Council of Medical Research, published at the end of every year. And this is a 2023 report, which also includes the trends in resistance or susceptibility to meropenem. And as you can see, the resistance scenario is not very encouraging. In fact, for Klebsiella pneumoniae, the resistance rates are quite high, the susceptibility becoming very less. This rising AMR has, of course, called for multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary action because it is detrimental. In fact, mortality is very high, detrimental to patients and population health as well. And the WHO Global AMR Action Plan, as well as many national action plans, including that of India, has also underscored the need for multi-sector stakeholder cooperation. And the pharmaceutical industry, of course, is also an integral component to that. Well, for us, it's all about maintaining the balance because the more number of anti-infectives you have to treat a particular patient, especially the ones that are infected with multi-drug resistant organisms, it is in the larger interest of stewardship that we have those options available in the country. And therefore, access to newer anti-infectives is an important aspect when it comes to stewardship. The second interest, of course, is in the larger interest of the ecosystem as well as the population, especially public health, is how do we ensure that we slow down the rate of resistance, because we know that resistance is inevitable. It's just that how long can we hold or probably prevent its progress as rapidly as it would have had there been no interventions in place. This definitely helps us prolong the lifespans of our currently available antibiotics as well. And above all, what appropriate antimicrobial use would entail is basically patient outcomes, because physicians are then empowered with more choices that they can rationally use when it comes to treating these infections. I'll be talking about our stewardship approach in three buckets: awareness and education, surveillance, and implementation. When we look at awareness and education, we looked at different stakeholders that included clinicians, including the postgraduate students, the nursing fraternity, the pharmacy fraternity. And the focus, in fact, was more on education, that is basically communicating the right use of the drug, which would mean communicating about its indication, the different organisms that it covers, the dosing that is appropriate, the frequency of dosing, the way to administer the drug, and most importantly, where not to administer. So therefore, ceftazidime avibactam specifically does not cover Acinetobacter, neither does it cover MBL producing organisms, Enterobacterial specifically. And it was important that physicians know this important point so that it is used appropriately in the right set of patients. This, along with this, ceftazidime avibactam had come after a long hiatus of the last carbapenem that was introduced probably a decade ago. And therefore, we had to talk about the targeted use of this antibiotic because it was very specific to certain beta-lactamases, whether it was ESBL, AMCs, KPC, OXA48. All of these, knowing the epidemiology of these carbapenemases, ensure understanding the ecosystem around rapid diagnostics in the country and what can be done in the education space, or whether we could look at healthcare solutions or diagnostics tools that could aid the rapid detection of carbapenemases so that the drug could be given in the right set of patients. The last focus was, of course, on strengthening the healthcare ecosystem, and that's where partnerships came into focus with the national associations such as the Critical Care Medicine Body or the Infectious Disease Society in the country, where we focused on capacity building, whether it was supporting the infectious disease community or the pharmacist community through fellowships, educating our nurses on IPC and AMS practices. In fact, as a part of our CSR, we rolled out modules on IPC and AMS in local languages, the languages that the nurses were comfortable in. In fact, almost 9 languages are currently live and freely accessible to the nursing community. The next important point was surveillance. And here I'll probably talk about Atlas, our landmark surveillance database. Atlas stands for Antimicrobial Testing, Leadership and Surveillance. It's a global database, one of the largest AMI surveillance programs in the world. It was initiated by Pfizer in 2004, and it's a database that is easily available on a website called as atlas-surveillance.com. It basically provides almost 16 years of cumulative bacterial susceptibility data against a variety of diverse classes of antibiotics. India, of course, is one of those countries that is involved in it globally. This effort was also called out by Access to Medicine Foundation in its benchmark report in 2021, highlighting the steps that Pfizer had taken in R&D or manufacturing access and stewardship, specifically the Atlas program for sharing its raw data publicly on a platform. And with that understanding, we also realized when we looked at our ICMR, our very own national data, as well as the Atlas data, there were stark epidemiological differences between how the organisms behaved in ICUs in the country vis-a-vis the West. We, of course, are a high burden gram-negative infection country. The carbapenem resistance are very high. We also needed to understand the clinical outcomes with the innovative drugs that we get into the country, and whether the appropriate use leads to better patient outcomes. And therefore, we looked at various publications from our own database atlas in form of posters, papers, international national congresses, international journals as well. And we looked at different aspects of microbiology, which organisms were the trends in susceptibility to different antibiotics, comparators, were there differences with vis-a-vis the site of infection. All of those different aspects is what we look at publishing regularly at different intervals. And lastly, of course, support institutions and investigators through investigator-sponsored research in case they would like to study the effect of antibiotics in general on patient outcomes. And lastly, our focus always has been on how do we help the ecosystem, whether it is the HCP or the hospital, on implementing sustainable solutions. Because what we've realized after working for so many years in this space, stewardship implementation in any hospital setup requires a lot of time and labor to actually manually go through stuff, especially in India, where we have to go through multiple papers, etc., the reports, collate them, look at them, analyze them. And therefore, the key area that we looked at initially when we began our journey was certain quality improvement initiatives. Could we look at digitalizing the AMS workflow without having access to that data, the data remaining with the hospitals, whether it would ease the work of the stewardship team, whether it will help them in implementing better practices in their hospital. The next step that we looked at was shared resource model. Would a tertiary care hospital handhold certain hospitals in the periphery with a shared resource and look at improvements in resistance rate in those hospitals? There were point of care quality improvement initiatives, which we did with institutions such as NQOCN, where they had subject matter experts educating, guiding the hospital stakeholders on implementing stewardship, and then look at progressively reduction in hospital acquired infection rate. We've been pretty successful with each of these educational support that we've given to the institutions. And lastly, also look at real-time helplines with National Association like Infectious Disease Society, where doctors can reach out in real time for their queries directly to the subject matter experts and get their queries resolved in real time. Then we also realized that stewardship also has this behavioral angle. What are those behavioral parameters that probably stop or probably promote the right use of antibiotic in any hospital ecosystem? So the research supporting around that, we looked at business schools across India who had expertise in such area as well. And lastly, the CSR efforts focused on sustainable approaches as well. We had mid-sized hospitals who were handheld by subject matter experts over a period of time to ensure that they understood what it means to implement AMS in a system and what are the strategies that can help them have a sustainable approach. And I think with that, I would want to summarize that, of course, AMR is a big threat. It's a silent pandemic that's affecting almost every country on this planet, and it will require a wide range of stakeholders. And therefore, pharmaceutical industry, including the medical affairs community especially, is well positioned to play a part in this global response, not only through drug development, but also by taking tangible actions to support the responsible antimicrobial use. With that, I end my presentation. Looking forward to the questions. Over to you, Fabian.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akshata, for your presentation and this information around the initiative that Pfizer is doing in India in those 3 areas. So to continue, I will open the floor to Dr. Merfin Mpundu. He is the director and co-founder of React Africa, where he is responsible for the strategic leadership and implementing React strategy plan and activities in Africa, building partnership with other stakeholders, including government, supporting as well translation of evidence into policy, and contributed to the regional and global governance and catalyzing actions to address AMR. As well, just to mention that Merfin previously served as the Africa lead for partnership and stakeholder engagement at ICARS for 4 years. So then over to you, Merfin, and thank you very much for participating.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction, Fabian. And it is It is an honor and pleasure for me to share a few thoughts. Yeah, so I was asked to try and give a bit of a narrative or some thoughts around them around connecting and converging the tribal hospital antibiotic stewardship in countries of Africa for sustainable impact. As REACT has been in the African region since 2014, and we and has implemented a number of stewardship programs in different countries. And the approach generally has been to be able to create an enabling environment at country level through support of national policies that are developed, a national strategic framework for AMS, and that actually guides how the AMS programs in the countries are going to be sustained. Involves a lot of capacity building, involves the development of tools that clinicians can use to be able to prescribe antimicrobials appropriately. And it begins by doing a situation analysis that involves conducting a point prevalence study that informs the interventions that are actually chosen and selected. But to be able to appreciate the way that stewardship challenges are unique in the African region, one needs to look at the challenges that are faced in implementing sustainable AMS programs in the region. Some of these barriers include health system barriers, limitation to access to quality healthcare and antimicrobials that are chronically out of stock in most health systems are an impediment. Limited bacteriology and diagnostics, again, a major issue there. Low health literacy levels, they contribute to self-medication and inappropriate antimicrobials. Regulations are quite weak that one can access these precious molecules over the counter and in registered and regulated markets. Supply chain issues, weak supply chains have an impact on stockouts. Of course, there are also prevalence of counterfeit and substandard antimicrobials that are on the market. Enforcement, as I indicated, is quite weak. Professional capacity and capabilities, that's a workforce that is not trained in stewardship, and also lack of human resources, especially in the hard to reach areas. Facility infrastructure is another grouping of factors that affect stewardship. Limited domestic funding, inadequate microbiology, poor digitalization of data, and lack of systems for monitoring AMU and AMR. And we've got cross sectoral collaborations. So the interventions that are developed actually address health system barriers. They address supply chain and regulation, professional capacity and capabilities, and also facility infrastructure. That's where interventions are typically targeted. And from the experience that we've had of looking at a number of programs that start in the region, one of the challenges has been sustainability of these programs. These programs, are challenged that most of them only run through the end of the funding cycles, and what happens after that, there is movement of staff attrition, the challenges of lab infrastructure, challenges in terms of chronic stockouts that affect that. So we designed a program that we are implementing now in Kenya and in Zambia an antibiotic stewardship program through innovation, research, and education that integrates innovation, research, and education. The first phase involved, conducting, point prevalence studies to inform doing assessment of antibiotic stewardship, conducting key informant interviews, and first group discussions to better understand how prescribing is, what are the drivers of good prescribing, what are the disenablers or that, and following that moved into phase 2 that has interventions that target behavioral aspect of prescribing, implementing a prospective audit and feedback mechanisms, pharmacist-led interventions, de-escalation, and rolling out of a digital application and chatbot. Phase 3 will involve the post-implementation evaluation, compliance, of comprehensive project report, and the dissemination of actually findings. What is achieved, what is projected after this project is that, there will be enhancement of understanding of antibiotic use. The knowledge gaps are going to be addressed. Evidence-based decisions are going to be guiding the utilization and prescription of these antimicrobials in health systems, and strengthening of antibiotic stewardship in participating hospitals, and sustained improvements in patient outcomes. What are the differences, or what additional aspects have been introduced into the traditional stewardship program? Traditional stewardship programs, we focus on creating a multidisciplinary AMS team, conducting the PPS as part of getting the situation information, as it were, focuses on meetings, education, and training, on enforcement of guidelines, on reviews of the prescription charts and audits and feedback, and monitoring and evaluation. The Aspire project goes a little further. It takes an approach that is institutional-wide approach. The traditional ones pick up a unit or 2 units in a hospital. The Aspire takes a hospital-wide approach, and it focuses also among its interventions, behavioral change interventions. It has got an economic evaluation, but it also introduces in innovative digital tools that both clinicians and patients can use to better understand their treatments, but also to guide clinicians in selecting the best options of treatment. And so the patient-centered approach, it does focus on the patient, and it's got a resident technical support from subject expert matters. These are embedded into a health system, and they stay in the health system for the duration of the project. And there's comprehensive tracking and advanced analytics that are supported through these digital interventions, and this, we think, that is going to complement the traditional elements of stewardship. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Murphy, for the presentation and for the details on Aspire. I would like to welcome Nusrat. If you want to unmute and perhaps share your screen. Very happy to be joined by Professor Nusrat Shafiq, who is Professor in Clinical Pharmacology at the Postgraduate Institute of Medical Education and Research in India. She's held various positions, including being President of the Society of Antimicrobial Stewardship Practices in India. And her team is focused on various different streams, including establishing models and tools for enabling AMS, working with the team for global drug repository for dose optimization, in looking at implementable policies, and also working on enabling peripheral centers and community for AMS. As part of training, her team has regular multidisciplinary training sessions in the departments of pediatrics, intensive care, trauma, surgery, and neonatology. And over the last 3 years, they have been also working on a dedicated internal medicine, clinical pharmacology, and therapeutic sessions, which is now being transmitted through telemedicine. So with that quite long introduction from my side, I will hand over to you, Nusrat, to tell us a bit more about some of this work.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Claudia. And I would like to thank ICARS and AMS for for this opportunity to share our experience with you all. I must say that through this work of antimicrobial stewardship that we have been doing for the last 10 years, we have been able to, we started very rudimentally, and we reached a point where we are now developing tools which will enable stewardship in various aspects of stewardship in LMICs. And as a result of which we are part of the global network for CamoNet, that is Wellcome Trust driven, which is for antimicrobial optimization. So there is a lot of learning and sharing going on in this entire life cycle. But without much ado, let me talk about the last leg of this entire discussion. By last leg, I don't really mean the last presentation, just the aspect of use of antimicrobials responsibly. I'll share some of the reflections and thoughts that I have in for this stretch of responsible use of antimicrobials. So somebody would need to help me with moving the slides there, because yes. So there we have the first panel here shows a recently culminated point prevalence survey where we undertook this survey with 7 other institutes across India, and we moved it through our Society for Antimicrobial Stewardship Practices. We handheld everyone, and as you could very well appreciate that the use of watch and reserve drugs is kind of very, very disturbing there. And the best part is that most of it would classify as not being irrational. I mean, it was given because it was needed. A large proportion of it was needed, and you could also perhaps see that drugs like colistin and there are others which haven't figured in here in this representation, like tigecycline, fosfomycin, even minocycline are occupy a great proportion of this use. So this is quite a case for many of the tertiary care centers within India, and especially if they're in big cities, cater to a large population. I would want our audience to understand that our annual footfall of patients and their attendance in our hospital would be greater than many of the populations of many of European countries. So that's just to have people understand what is it that is being dealt with. And as you could appreciate, that a large proportion of the use of drugs which address carbapenem resistant organisms is driven by a set of gram-negative organisms, Acinetobacter, Klebsiella, and E. coli being the prominent ones among them, but Pseudomonas is also closing in very it's increasingly being encountered now. So that helps us assess the need. The need is very much there. And when we talk about critical care, we have to understand that critical care is not just happening in the intensive care units, because of sometimes you are so pressed for the beds that you do the critical care in the other areas within the hospital. So that's another understanding, which is, I think, of a very unique situation for many of the people in LMICs. We need to understand, when we talk about stewardship being roped into introduction of new antibiotics, we have to have a very good understanding of infrastructure. And infrastructure from different angles, diagnostic backup is very, very important. And it is so patchy, and things are beginning to show up. There is a lot of capacity. People are putting in efforts to handhold others, but this mapping has to be carried out very carefully. Then pharmacies and clinical care facility itself has to be totally mapped out. When we talk about tertiary care facilities or critical care setups, these are not monolithic. There are all shades, and as many shades as we can imagine. Processes like stewardship and infection control practices. And then it's very important to understand the experience of setups as in rolling out such a very controlled kind of use of antimicrobials, especially if they're recently used. Can we have the next slide, please? Can someone press the next button? And this mapping would also need to take into consideration costs as aspects, economics aspect. Who is paying for this? Is it till date we have large proportion of patients paying it out of pocket, though a lot of schemes from Government of India like Ayushman Bharat and others are catering to a need of great proportion, but still there is a large deficit there. Then we always have to weigh it against competing priorities, investing more in infection control measures or prioritizing the stewardship. So these things have to be built in. And then equity issues, healthcare is not it is not available universally. So those who can pay sometimes, or those who have been rendered poor free because of certain things, those are the ones who could possibly access these health cares. In private setups, these issues become even more important. Yeah, so may I have the next slide, please? So this is very important to understand. And it's very important also to appreciate that over the past 10 years, we've had some kind of learnings through different situations, maybe. Which is closest to my memory in the near past is that of the drug that we use in some of the drugs that we used during the pandemic. Here I'm giving you the example of this very important anti-inflammatory agent that we had to use during pandemic. The supplies were limited and we wanted to use it judiciously. So at our healthcare setup, which is a tertiary care center, we developed this very well written out guidelines, and we enable the use in a monitored way, and which could also enable auditing of it. So that was a good learning that we had. But importantly, it is important to appreciate that at the country level, something like this had happened previously in the case of oseltamivir, when Tamiflu supplies were all very well regulated, guidelines were laid into place, and it was ensured that most people got the treatment, and this happened over a very short period of time. Important is also the learning in oseltamivir example in H1N1 pandemic of 2009, I think it was that supply chains were also addressed at the same time. My co-panelists talked about ceftazidime avibactam, and it's a very important sharing for everyone that we have been able to use it very rationally and judiciously in our hospital setup. It is usually a lab-based use. If it is empiric use, there is a method of going about it, and stewardship team is always referred to when they have to start ceftazidime avibactam. We had some learnings from hydroxychloroquine. I think I could possibly share those experiences that we have shared in public domain to show how we have some examples which are existing very locally, and they can be leveraged upon for any kind of plan that we want to have in the near future. Important is to appreciate that all these situations, barring maybe hydroxychloroquine, had to be chloroquine. Everything had to be done in a very short period of time. Time matters there because it would be critical care patients that we would be using these antimicrobials largely for. So these are good examples to draw lessons from. Can I have the next slide, please? Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
And we've been working with various organizations, and we have kind of summarized all this into this pictorial representation by saying that there should be a path which addresses decision-making process. There should be an intervening stewardship there, and then antibiotic distribution could be very well regulated by ensuring controlled sales, pre-authorization, and if it is a hub and spoke model was something that we propose, and I think that is very doable. But over the last 4-5 months that I've been thinking about this topic, we have to also think about aspects like sustained availability. We all know that the moment everything is very controlled, the manufacturers may lose interest. And so there would be a very important role of international organizations to have some models like Netflix models or other models wherein pull techniques of sustained availabilities are also roped in. We also have to be very cognizant of the repercussions of such a model. When something is needed, it is needed by the whole lot of people who may not be figuring into these hubs and the spokes that we're proposing, but they could very well need it, and we have to address the voices which are likely to be raised by patient support groups once such a model is rolled out. Can we have the next slide, please? Yeah,
Sorry,
thank you, and I
Nusrat,
would
we
like
are
to.
running a
Yeah.
little bit out of time, so I will request if you could
Yeah, so
wrap up your
Yeah, so
presentation. Thank
this
you.
is my final slide, and here I would like to say that when we talk about hub and spokes, we have to take into consideration alignment of policies and implementation of the same. For this, we'd require a great deal of mapping. It would be important to focus on co-localized healthcare setups where all these mechanisms can be feasible. Best would be if there is a technological support which enables audits to be built in. Equitable access has to be at the bottom of it, and it all has to be a reiterative cycle, striking a balance not only between not ensuring not only rational use but also responsible use of antimicrobials. Thank you very much, and I'll be happy to take questions.
Thank you very much, Nusrat, for your intervention. Just to remind as well, all the participants to please add your answers for the panelists on the Q&A chat, so then we can soon start answering them. So now, following for our last panelists, I want to introduce Dr. Alexandra Cameron. She holds a Bachelor of Science in Biochemistry, a Master of International Public Health, and a PhD in Pharmaceutical Science. She leads a team in the World Health Organization's AMR division, focused on fostering the development of new high-priority antibacterial agents and ensuring equitable access to both new and existing treatments. Over to you, Alexandra, and thank you very much for participating in this webinar.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
good. No, thank you so much to ICARS and the Access to Medicines Foundation for the invitation. I'm going to present today on a specific activity that we are undertaking at WHO to develop operational guidance for countries for the introduction and appropriate use of antibiotics. Just a bit of background, this tool is being developed under the umbrella of the SECURE initiative, which aims to improve access to both new and existing antibiotics. And there's a range of activities ongoing under SECURE. And this is just one kind of component of a broader set of interventions. So I think just to frame the guidance, that this is not a guidance that can solve all possible access challenges linked to countries being able to access, register, and use new antibiotics, but it's really one of the key ingredients, I would say, in order to introduce those products in a measured and effective way. So what we aim to do with this guidance was to develop something very practical that would allow countries to work through a process to develop a product introduction plan. The WHO guidance doesn't speak to any specific drug. It's drug agnostic, and it's meant to be adapted to develop a specific product introduction strategy that would be more adapted to an individual drug and especially a health system context as well. Our primary audience is country decision makers and implementers. And our approach, we've aimed to take a holistic approach, so looking really at the end-to-end value chain from early stages of planning, procurement, supply, all the way down to use at the facility level. We don't aim to duplicate any existing guidance on those topics that exists from WHO or elsewhere, but really to build on existing recommendations and really connect the dots across a range of different topic areas. And while the guidance is aimed at the country level, we also have a section that covers supranational or beyond country strategies that can help to support access. So covering efforts such as pooled procurement, regulatory harmonization, and local production and others. So that's also covered in the guidance as well. In terms of the scope of the guidance, we're really talking about antibiotic introduction. So we haven't covered any other antimicrobials. We're really focused on antibiotics and particularly on watch and reserve antibiotics, because these would be the products that may be newly introduced and that may also need specific efforts in order to introduce them appropriately and steward them appropriately through the value chain. We are talking about antibiotics for human health. We haven't taken on the challenge of product introduction in other sectors, though we recognize that that could be valuable as well. And where what we are not covering is products that are still in the pipeline, introducing a new generic equivalent of an existing antibiotic that may already be widely used. And the guidance is not at all intended to be any kind of treatment guideline. It really is aimed to complement the existing WHO treatment guidelines, as well as the Aware Book and the Essential Medicines List. So very quickly, some of the guiding principles, and when you receive the document, you'll see each of these has a set of sub-principles as well, but we've really aimed for strong country-led planning and coordination, sustained and comprehensive access for all who need them, a balanced national essential medicines list and antibiotic formulary across the different access, watch, and reserve categories, safe and effective antibiotic supply and distribution, robust stewardship, and adequate resource allocation. So just one slide on the process that we've gone through to develop this guidance. So the guidance is being led and steered by a WHO task force that was formed with the specific goal of supporting the development of this guidance. And the task force includes a number of WHO colleagues from across different topic areas. So from within AMR, this includes stewardship, surveillance and labs and access to diagnostics, national action plan implementation, our unit, which focuses on R&D and access, but we're also collaborating very closely with our medicines colleagues and have a number of participants to the task force that cover topics ranging from medicines regulation, pricing, pharmacovigilance, substandard and falsified products, really running the full spectrum. We also have participants on the task force from all of our regional offices, both from the AMR, regional advisors, as well as medicines. Key methodological approach has been desk research, including reviewing existing guidance and tools and discussing how those can be adapted. But we've also undertaken a number of deep dives, one focusing more on supply side interventions and one focusing more on the delivery side of interventions. And those deep dives have included a number of key informant interviews that have informed the development of the guidance. A key step in the process has been a technical consultation that I know some of you on the line have attended back in June 2024. We had representation, I think, from over 80 stakeholders at the meeting, with very strong participation as well from countries, covering not only Ministry of Health, country participants, but actually a variety of different types of country stakeholders. So representation from regulatory agencies, clinicians also working in academia, and so forth. So that was a key input into the development of the guidance. And that was also informed by an industry roundtable that we held in partnership with the Access to Medicines Foundation and GARD-P, which included over 30 industry participants that we held just a few weeks before the broader technical consultation to ensure that we had industry views represented as well. Where we're at now is that we have taken on board the comments from the technical consultation. We have sent a new version of the guidance out to all participants and have gotten excellent feedback again. So we're now in the stage of finalizing the guidance with input from the task force, which we aim to do by the end of the month. I won't go through this in detail, but I wanted to just show you a flavor of the structure of the guidance. So our guidance is really split up into a few different modules, one on the pre-planning stages, a second on the decision-making around the need for introducing a new antibiotic and how to decide and on what evidence that should be made and which antibiotic should be selected and how those decisions can be made and with which governance structures. And then a large part of the guidance is indeed around developing the introduction plan that really, as I say, is an end-to-end plan that covers all aspects along the value chain from the policy making, procurement, distribution, all the way down to use at facility level. Then importantly, there is a module on monitoring and evaluation as well as research, where if resources allow, we have some guidance on operational research that can be conducted to monitor the introduction plan. And then finally, and last but not least, the resourcing that's needed to actually implement an introduction plan. And we have a section on costing as well. This is just an example of what the guidance looks like. Right now, it is comprised of a shorter document that goes through sort of the steps involved in all those different blocks from the previous slide, as well as a set of annexes where we have quite extensive complementary information on each topic that users can go to for further information as well. But for example, here, you see that around deciding to introduce an antibiotic, we would cover the purpose of this step, the sub-steps that would be involved, the key considerations, and then the relevant tools and resources. And we have a number of links in the document to various tools and resources that already exist on individual topics. We've also tried to incorporate country case studies throughout the document as much as possible that we collected through the key informant interviews and the technical consultation. This I think really brings it to life and shows how things actually can work in practice as well. Oh, sorry about that. So also to say that the guidance has a number of accompanying tools. So we have a detailed checklist that can be used to go through every step of the introduction planning to ensure that all aspects have been covered. We've been working on the costing of the introduction plan using the National Action Plan costing tool, which is an existing tool that countries already are familiar with, and really itemizing all the different steps and costs that would need to be considered within the NAP costing tool. And then we have a number of templates as well and guidance on the use of those templates that can help in introduction planning. So Gantt chart, theory of change and log frame, and there's a sample theory of change in the guidance as well, and a template for developing a policy brief to take to decision makers around the securing commitment and buy-in for introducing a new antibiotic. So just to say that, as I mentioned, we are at the final stages of developing the guidance itself. We hope to finalize the content by the end of this month, after which it will take a couple of months for editing, layout, and clearances. So we should have a version published by the end of Q1 of this year or early Q2. But we really see this being somewhat of a living document, and this would really be a first edition. So what we're looking to do as a next phase is to pilot test this guidance with countries that are already considering product introduction or through pilot programs that might be planned or underway, such as the Tandem project. So we're looking for those opportunities so that we can really see where this guidance works, where there may be elements to strengthen or to add, and hopefully look towards a second edition based on practical experience, perhaps as early as 2026. So those are our next steps, and I have put my email address on the last slide so that if any of the webinar participants are interested in exploring opportunities to collaborate with us on this pilot testing, we would be more than happy to hear from you. So please don't hesitate to get in touch, and we can take those conversations forward. So thanks very much, and look forward to the questions and discussions.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Alexandra, for the overview of the guidance and also some of the timeframes that go with it. We're going to go straight into the Q&A. So if you have questions, please do pop them on the Q&A box. I see that there's two that have already been answered by Louise and by Murfin. But we've had a couple of questions that have been shared with us as panelists that I'm going to go through quick. So the first one is for Louise, which is mostly around sort of the process that CarbX goes through when you start discussing aspects of stewardship with companies. And the question is sort of when does this happen, but also what is the response of the companies typically? And you also mentioned that there might be differences in terms of the type of company, the size of the company. So if you can tell us a bit more about that, really appreciate it.
Sure, thank you. So yeah, just in terms of actually discussing it with companies, it comes as no surprise. CarbX has been very clear around the importance of stewardship and access and the contractual levers that exist. And so it's very much at those very early stages when a company applies, responds to a call for proposals. It also has the opportunity to ask questions about this. Should it then decide that maybe these are too restrictive for it, or for whatever reasons within its own legal framework they're not able to respond to these conditionalities. So it's a culture of no surprises effectively, and then as soon as a company is then chosen to be funded, it then has access to all of the support. So these products, the stewardship and access plan and the commercialization plans that I mentioned specifically, don't need to be finalized, and in the case of the stewardship and access plan, indeed published, until a product would reach that very late stage of clinical trials, or even early, once it's had its first approval. So we give companies time to develop their thinking on this and to access support both from CarbX internally but also external stakeholders, and we help to signpost that. So there's a suite of information available to them and a process of education and support for the smallest companies. So yeah, and I think so long as companies know that this is going to be in exchange for CarbX funding, it doesn't come as any surprise. So I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. Thank you for that. I wanted to put a question forward for Murfin, mostly around stakeholders, right? And I think this is something that has come through all of the discussions that we've had today, but I was curious to hear sort of, we know that there's a number of stakeholders that are involved in improving antimicrobial stewardship in Africa, but do you think that this map of stakeholders has changed? Have you seen any differences? Is it sort of, has it improved? Has it worsened? So just wanted to get your views on that.
Yeah, well, thank you so much for the question. The map hasn't significantly changed. It's the same players that have been supporting stewardship, at least in the region. It's React Africa, of course, ICARS. It's University of Maryland. It's the Commonwealth Pharmaceutical Association. It's University of Switzerland, and so it's still very few, and the sort of implementation that ends up occurring is that out of the hundreds and hundreds of institutions in the region, only a very handful of those institutions are actually supported, and so the vast majority of institutions are not supported. And with that sort of inherent challenge, it's very hard to see a lot of actually progress and traction towards a national AMS strengthening, as it were. Over, yeah.
Thank you very much, Marvin, for your intervention. I think, Claudia, that's answered the question that was done. And I want to proceed then. I have another question here, this time for Dr. Nosrat. Here they're like asking that from your experience, what have been the two critical factors that have helped development of the stewardship culture in your hospital in India? Since you already during your presentations comment on some of the interventions, flowcharts that was implemented in the hospital when they introduced some new antibiotics there.
Yeah, thank you, Fabian, for putting that question. If you want me to narrow down to two key aspects which really helped us enable it, they would be involvement of all the stakeholders right from the beginning. So that was very important, and it included a diverse kind of stakeholders, including people from the administration, and now even the nursing staff. So that was one thing. Second thing I would consider as being very key in implementation is a very good understanding of the processes and flows and practices, limitations, drivers of antimicrobial use. And once we had that understanding, we developed our intervention strategies based on these understanding. So those, I think, were two important reasons why it became a functional antimicrobial stewardship program. Yeah, that would be all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nosrat. In that sense, then I will proceed with Dr. Akshata. So, who were like the critical stakeholder with whom partnership were established to ensure like appropriate use and to start working on the interventions that Pfizer has like ongoing?
So, so from associations point of view, we've looked at different associations, whether the academic associations, including the Society of Critical Care Medicine, or whether it is the Infectious Diseases Society that works actively in the antimicrobial stewardship space, or there is this other society which works on even for nursing education, somebody called as Delhi Society for Rational Use of Drugs. There have been across public and private sectors that we've tried to work with. There have been hospitals, institutions that we've tried to work with, because given the population size and the number of specialties and the doctors that we have, reach is an important factor, and therefore collaboration with societies with a shared strategic approach on how do we ensure appropriate use of antimicrobials is one of the ways in which we've tried to work in the country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Akshata. I don't know, Claudia, do you have some other questions?
Yeah, I think I can see one else that I think also for my benefit I would like to ask Alexandra. And I think again this is something that has been discussed throughout sort of infrastructure diagnostics, and I think I was curious to sort of understand whether affordable diagnostics that can also guide appropriate use globally will be eventually considered within the operational guidance. Is this something that you will be planning to extend to in the future, or how are you considering I would say the issue of diagnostics more broadly?
Yeah, sure. Thanks for that question. I mean, access to diagnostics is built into the guidance as a kind of fundamental need. And I wouldn't go maybe as far as to say a minimum requirement, but really a big need for as a infrastructure in order to appropriately introduce, especially watch and reserve antibiotics that we're focused on. So it is already well represented in the guidance. We don't provide guidance on how to introduce new diagnostics. That would need to be a separate piece of guidance. And if we see and hear a need for that, we can certainly consider having a parallel piece on that. But certainly we stress in the guidance that the introduction of antibiotics should be accompanied by the availability of necessary diagnostic testing. And we have quite an extensive set of guidance and also an extensive annex on this. And so access to diagnostic capacity and surveillance are part of the planning process, the part of the introduction process. And countries should indeed, as part of their decision-making, consider whether they have adequate lab and surveillance capacity in order to effectively and appropriately introduce the product in question. So that's certainly represented there. And we also try to provide sort of some scenarios as well, depending on the availability of resources and the status of diagnostic capacity in individual countries, to try to guide countries that may be at different levels of capacity and infrastructure as to how to appropriately plan and introduce a new product. So as I say, it's all in there, but in terms of the parallel guidance, I think it's really something interesting to think about and would love feedback on whether they're, that would be valuable to countries or not. We can certainly consider it for the future. Thanks.
Thank you, Alexandra. Fabienne, are there any other questions? Yeah, we have some questions coming through the Q&A box. So I'll go through the first one. Could it be feasible? I mean, this is a general question for the panel. Could it be feasible to introduce AMR in WHO CTBT for NRAs? And you can see the question on the Q&A box as well. And also quite a few requests for the email address of Professor Murfin for collaborations with different partners.
Yeah, I can take that question about WHO if you would like. One of the things that we did, a separate piece that was done for Secure that we published last year, was a review of the role of regulatory agencies in addressing antibiotic shortages. I can put the link in the chat there. And actually, it turned into a policy and regulatory review because, of course, regulators are working as part of an ecosystem with procurement units of the ministries of health and insurance agencies and others. But we did that piece in close collaboration with the Regulatory System Strengthening Unit at WHO. And indeed, we are exploring whether there's any potential to incorporate something into the global benchmarking tool for regulators. Not sure yet whether that will happen or not, but it's definitely something that we're actively discussing and looking at opportunities even more broadly to disseminate the results of that review to regulators, regulatory networks, and so forth. So it's a very pertinent question and something that is already in process to some degree on the topic of shortages, at least.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. I think that's answered the question in the Q&A. Pitifully, we are like running out of time, and I know that all of the panelists here have like a really busy agenda. So I will just, to finalize, would like to ask the panelists if you have a final remarks, final comments, so then we can close this webinar. I don't know, Alexandra, if you would like to start. You're like the first person I have on the screen, so.
Sure. No, I mean, I think that this really just highlighted the range of different efforts and activities that are underway. And I think it's really exciting to see how much work is happening in various formats through various projects. So I think, pulling together and creating a kind of a knowledge hub around the lessons learned around integration of access and stewardship and appropriate use would be really valuable. So I think this webinar has contributed to that, but we should find other opportunities to bring all of these different pieces together and learn from each other. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. I don't know if any other of the panelists would like to take the next call.
Yeah, I guess I can go. I think I thought it was a given. I mean, but I think I should have mentioned that WHO's efforts in the region for supporting AMS, are actually quite enormous. They're a critical stakeholder that has been supporting the region. But I think we really have a lot of work to do towards getting sustainable AMS programs in addressing AMR. And I think that would take all of us working together and getting more new entrants to actually support the sector and the discipline of AMS. Thank you for the opportunity. To ICARS and.
Thank you very much, Marfin. I think that Nosrat, you want to say something as well?
Yeah, just that I really appreciate the efforts that you have been putting into understanding the feasibility of this plan. But I would like to just make a suggestion, if it would be possible for carrying out proper qualitative research, hearing more voices through focus group discussions, interviews, to just see if no pieces are left out and making it all near to foolproof. It can never be foolproof, but near to that. Yeah, that was just a small bit I wanted to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Nusrat. So I think that I will then close the webinar here. I would just again want to thank all the panelists and as well Claudia as the co-host for your participation. And I was just gonna say again, thank you as well for all the participants to be here and hear some of the activities that are ongoing around the globe. And just remember that this webinar is going to be then available as well soon in social medias and as well in the Access to Medicine Foundation and ICARS website. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.